Now in our 25th year, a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are this week in Amateur Radio. Your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition, number 1317 with a release and air date of Saturday, May 25, 2024. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone.
On the air and on the internet since 1993, serving the amateur radio community with weekly, reliable, amateur radio news and special features, we are, This Week in Amateur Radio, the premier, worldwide amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1317, our Dayton Hamvention Roundup edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. The Dayton Hamvention 2024 is in the books and we will have a complete overview of the event, including a look at the ARRL National Convention, Youth Rally, forums, and more. The ARRL headquarters computer systems and network are taken offline by an apparent cyber attack. A missing satellite is rediscovered in orbit. Starlink and Omnispace are at the FCC battling over frequency coordination and ground interference. WWVB is operating at reduced power due to high wind damage to one of its antennas. The FCC is busy implementing the new White House spectrum policy. And we will have the unique story of one pirate radio broadcaster who is still on the air and is celebrating its 60th anniversary. All that and a lot more is straight ahead in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will discuss the nature of inspiration in ham radio. Our own amateur radio historian, Bill Continelli, W2XOY returns with another edition of the Ancient Amateur Archives. This week, Bill takes us all aboard the Wayback Machine to look at part 1 of his series on the history of amateur radio repeaters. We will stop by and visit with Bill Saliers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio here in the suburbs of Albany, New York, I'm Guy, sitting in for W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And this week, reporting from our news bureau in Cortlandville, New York, at my home QTH, where the lawnmowers are mowing and the leaf blowers are blowing and the weed whackers are whacking, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our True New York News Bureau, where this week the cottonwoods started shedding, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting from our Catskill Mountain Amateur Radio Outpost, where we finished putting up the fence to keep the larger and smaller critters out of the garden, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where the really nasty weather has been skirting around the city for the past week or so, driving the forecasters crazy, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
And now, with our lead story, here is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
Leading off our news this week, users of the ARRL's Logbook of the World and the ARRL Learning Center were struggling with a service disruption following what the League described as a serious incident involving access to network and headquarters-based systems. The ARRL posted on its website a reassurance that its member database contains only details that are available from public records, such as name, address, and call signs, adding that no credit card information or other sensitive information is stored. The ARRL did not clarify the cause of the security breach, adding only that it was giving highest priority to having industry experts resolve the issue. As we come to air, the system has been offline for more than a week, and no resolution date is available.
3 days of festivities for the 2024 ARRL National Convention, hosted by Dayton Hamvention, concluded on Sunday, May 19th. With more details, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this special report.
Thousands of ARRL members were among the crowds of radio amateurs who descended on the fairgrounds in Xenia, Ohio. The convention theme, Be Radioactive, was played out in a variety of ARRL-sponsored exhibits, presentations, and activities. One particular focus area was on youth involvement in amateur radio. On Saturday, ARRL hosted a youth rally that drew dozens of young people for an all-day immersion into ham radio interest and activities. It was great to see the kids fired up about ham radio, said ARRL Education and Learning Manager Steve Goodgame, K5ATA. They got to make radio contact with a parachute mobile station, learn about satellites, and really put radio concepts into action. In his forum, Youth Outreach Through Amateur Radio STEM Education, Goodgame shared the keys to success ARRL has found in helping grow interest in radio among the next generation. A video recording of the forum is available on the ARRL HQ YouTube channel. Within the large ARRL exhibit area was a booth for the ARRL Collegiate Amateur Radio Program, known as CARP, staffed by student volunteers. They welcome college-aged hams, helping network students from all over the world. Amateur radio needs more youth involved, said Ruslan Gildulan, KE8ZCA R9WFW, a student at Case Western Reserve University, who volunteered with the CARP booth. On Saturday afternoon, Morgan Lyons, KI5SXY, led the ARRL Collegiate Amateur Radio Forum. Lyons is a student attending Missouri University of Science and Technology and president of the Missouri S&T Amateur Radio Club, W0EEE. Throughout the convention, ARRL President Rick Roderick, K5UR, and other volunteer leaders of the association visited with members and answered questions. We've had so many members come by and talk about things going on in amateur radio, things amateur radio is doing. It has just been fantastic, said Roderick. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The next ARRL National Convention will be hosted by the Huntsville Hamfest in Huntsville, Alabama in August 2026.
The second day of the 2024 ARRL National Convention, hosted at the Dayton Hamvention, was a success, and the attendee turnout was impressive. The chilly, cloudy morning soon gave way to mostly blue skies. The heavy attendance was especially apparent in the expo buildings, as hordes of hams flocked to the manufacturers' booths, not only to get out of the heat, but to browse a huge variety of equipment. The aisles were flanked by exhibitors like Flex Radio, ABR Industries, Bigali Keys, ICOM, Gigaparts, DX Engineering, Ham Radio Outlet, and many more big names in the amateur radio manufacturing community. At the ARRL exhibit booths, Eric Stoddard, K8ERS, stands aside the ARRL monobeam dual-band antenna he just purchased. Looks like it's going to be a good antenna, and hopefully it'll perform as well as it looks. And that in the next few weeks it'll be on the air, he said, before disappearing back into the sea of other hams, most of whom are also carrying new purchases. The antenna is perfect for hams with limited space who would like to take advantage of the global operating opportunities that propagation is affording near the peak of solar cycle 25. It features an integrated 10-meter Moxon and a 6-meter Yagi. The first bright youth presenter out of many of sixth graders, Cameron Fry, KD9VGV, and only 2 years after being introduced to amateur radio, he's become a general class operator, fully fledged Parks on the Air fanatic, and that's just part of his ham radio repertoire. I've done more than 100 central activations, he said, in more than 40 different parks. He also has hunted for more than 700 different parks, said Fry with pride. The youth rally continued for most of the day with a slew of activities planned for the young hams. To break the ice, the young people were encouraged to catch a satellite pass outside the forum room that just happened to be overhead at the start of the rally's next phase. The youth rally was capped off with a forum about the ARRL Collegiate Amateur Radio Program, featuring speakers from many of the participating colleges and universities. Another jam-packed Hamvention Saturday is in the books, and the final day of the event will surely be one to remember.
Now celebrating our 25th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
Hamvention General Chairman Jim Storms is proud to announce that the 2024 event had a record-setting official attendance of 35,877. We thank everyone that attended and hope you had a wonderful time. Friday morning's rain appeared to not put a damper on attendance. Saturday and Sunday's weather was outstanding. There was a lot of activity all across the event. People attended from all around the world and others from close by. You are the ones why we work to provide this event. Hopefully, you found the equipment, hardware, software, or forums you desired. Again, I want to thank my hard-working committee chairs and their assistant chairs, along with the approximately 700 volunteers. There are several functions that occur before and after the show. However, a large numbers work much more than that. In some cases, they work so much that they do not have a chance to see much of the event. I am especially appreciative of those efforts. We thank the American Radio Relay League for holding their national convention in conjunction with this year's Hamvention.
The 2024 ARRL National Convention hosted at Dayton Hamvention is a wrap. The final half day on Sunday morning is a slight departure from the thrilling bustle of Friday and Saturday. Radio amateurs were making a final effort to get by and see everything on their list, a tall order with 5 exhibit halls full of vendors. The weather gave a break from Saturday's scorching heat. A sunny, cool breeze through the fairgrounds giving comfort to the last-minute con-goers. Inside Forum Room 3, the ARRL National Convention track presentations continued to engage members. Sunday started with ARRL Field Services Manager Mike Walters' WHZY Tips for Successful Radio Clubs. Amateur radio clubs are constantly adapting to challenges with recruiting and maintaining membership, and the exchange of advice between clubs has become essential. This talk was followed by the ARRL Contest Program Update, presented by ARRL Contest Program Manager Paul Burke, N1 SFE, and ARRL Radio Sport Manager Bart Yankee, W9JJ. They overviewed several new changes to ARRL's on-air operating events, including limited antenna overlay being added to HF contests, a youth overlay being added to all contests, and overlays being added to certificates. Additionally, changes were made to the 10 GHz and up contest rules. Proposed dates to the upcoming 2025 Earth-Moon-Earth contest have been released as well. The forum schedule concluded with ARRL Lab Digital RF engineer John McAuliffe, W1DRF, presenting Beyond Repeaters. See how far your tech license will take you. This compelling presentation features many of the underutilized activities that technician class operators should take advantage of, like UHF and VHF operation, EME, and digital packet radio. Tech Class hams took notice of all the activities they have not known were possible with their license privileges. These presentations will be archived on the ARRL HQ YouTube in the 2024 ARRL National Convention playlist. As Solar Cycle 25 continues to peak, the activity on the 6 and 10 meter bands offers a lot of potential DX to technicians. The new ARRL Momo Beam dual band beam antenna is a good tool for techs seeking to extend their reach. More information is available at www.arrl.org/beam. You can see a photo album of all the action you may have missed on the ARRL Facebook page.
The 2024 ARRL National Convention included a track of forums featuring a variety of engaging topics of interest to amateur radio operators. If you didn't make it into the packed house of Forum Room 3 during the 3 short days of Dayton Hamvention, or perhaps you did and would like to see the material again, the content is available on the ARRL Headquarters YouTube channel. A playlist of many of the ARRL forums is available. The programs were professionally produced in HD and feature topics such as the ARRL Membership Forum, 5 Steps to a Successful POTA Activation, Ground is a Myth, Beyond Repeaters, See How Far Your Technician Class License Can Take You, and much more. The content and programming is just too good to not share with ARRL members who couldn't make it to Hamvention, said ARRL Public Relations and Outreach Manager Sierra Harrop, W5DX. There's something for every interest and experience level. I learned a lot while we were recording them. I hope our fellow hams find the playlist to be a valuable reference for years to come, she said.
It is the radio event of the summer. 2024 ARRL Field Day is June 22nd and 23rd. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is at League headquarters with this update.
The annual operating event is part contest, part emergency communications exercise, part public relations and outreach activity, and often a social highlight of the operating year. Many ARRL-affiliated clubs will be set up in visible locations to get together, get on the air, and get to the public and get them involved in amateur radio. You can find a location near you via the ARRL Field Day site locator. It's Ham Radio's Open House. The theme for 2024 ARRL Field Day is Be Radioactive. On-air activity has been especially strong thanks to the rising solar cycle 25, which has still yet to peak. The theme encourages hams to get out and get involved. There has never been a better time to be an active amateur radio operator. Cities and states across the country have made special proclamations for Field Day. In Ohio, Iowa, New Hampshire, and other areas, the governors have issued formal declarations honoring the community service provided by radio amateurs through programs like the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, ARRS. And you can share Field Day proclamations with ARRL at news@arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The ARRL Public Relations Committee is offering Field Day Public Relations and Outreach Training webinars live on Zoom to interested public information volunteers. Learn how to engage your local media and local officials and get tips for effective social media strategy. The webinars are scheduled for Wednesday, May 29th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time and 10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and Wednesday, June 5th at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Registration is required.
Wind damage to half of its phased array antenna has left radio station WWVB operating at reduced power outside Fort Collins, Colorado. The winds that struck the south antenna in early April were estimated to be higher than 90 miles per hour. The National Institute of Standards and Technology operates the timekeeping site. People throughout North America rely on WWVB's broadcasts to synchronize their watches, clock radios, and other consumer electronics. It is also used for accurate time synchronization and for timekeeping applications in appliances, cameras, and irrigation controllers. Since the wind damage occurred, the station is broadcast using its north antenna only and on reduced power. The National Institute of Standards and Technology explained the change in an announcement recorded on the 11th of May and posted on YouTube. There is also a notice on the NIST website.
In what may shape up as a first test of a new FCC rule about direct-to-cellular satellite services, a service provider has charged Starlink satellites with creating interference on the S-band. Omnispace, which has plans for building a global mobile network through a satellite constellation, has criticized Starlink satellites' own direct-to-device network for creating what a top executive calls a noise floor that renders their own customer services useless. According to a report on the Space.com website, SpaceX had previously written to Omnispace and the FCC about coordinating the frequencies of their respective system, but that exchange had not yet taken place. SpaceX's David Goldman asked Omnispace's Mindell de la Torre in early May to provide empirical evidence of the claimed interference. Goldman also questioned whether Omnispace may not be coordinating frequencies as required by the International Telecommunications Union or the FCC because it's a licensee based out of Papua New Guinea. After launching a handful of Starlink satellites with experimental direct-to-device payloads, SpaceX has ramped up the deployment of satellites with payloads intended to communicate directly with unmodified mobile phones. 2 Falcon 9 launches from California on May 10th and May 14th each carried 13 satellites with direct-to-device payloads, part of 20 Starlink satellites launched overall on each mission. Omnispace has plans for a constellation of more than 600 satellites, but currently only operates a few experimental satellites in low and medium Earth orbits. The reported interference could be part of a test of new FCC regulations adopted in March about direct-to-device satellite services called Supplemental Coverage from Space, or SCS, by allocations, like Omnispace's MSS assignment. Omnispace said at the time they were encouraged by the FCC's decision to make SCS a secondary service, but remained concerned about potential interference. In March, the FCC adopted regulations covering so-called supplemental coverage from space, under which direct-to-device satellite services are considered secondary to primary frequency allocations on the 2 gigahertz band.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
AMSAT had a major presence at Hamvention, with booths devoted to teaching satellite basics, membership recruitment, the AMSAT store, engineering, education, and the ambassador program. Traffic was heavy on Friday morning, May 17th, as soon as Hamvention opened its doors. While some came directly to the AMSAT booth with their questions or to make purchases at the store, many other Ham attendees were attracted by the displays as they wandered through the several Hamvention venues. Volunteer members of the AMSAT engineering team were on hand to show off models of the Golf T and Fox Plus satellites currently under construction. Engineering team members also discussed various projects that are part of the Ascent program, developing possible components for future satellites. At the education booth, CubeSat Sim models were transmitting actual telemetry and slow-scan TV data across the table, demonstrating how these tools can be assembled and used in classrooms and other settings to provide hands-on instruction in satellite basics. At the beginner's corner, experienced satellite operators answered questions and helped the curious to understand how easy and exciting it is to get started in this fascinating aspect of the amateur radio hobby. Rain on Friday morning prevented live satellite demonstrations, but these took place as satellite passes and Hamvention circumstances permitted on Saturday and Sunday. The 16th annual joint AMSAT and Tapper banquet was held on Friday evening at the Kohler Presidential Banquet Center in Kettering, Ohio, just south of Dayton. This year's banquet speaker was Bill Reed, NX5R, AMSAT PACSAT project manager, who highlighted the forthcoming PACSAT digital communications payload. This payload is drawing on lessons learned from previous digital satellites to provide smoother operations for users in the future. The AMSAT Forum was held on Saturday afternoon. Robert Bankston, KE4AL, AMSAT president, highlighted recent activities within AMSAT and discussed some of our challenges, accomplishments, projects, and late-breaking news. Jerry Buxton, N0JY, AMSAT Vice President for Engineering, provided a video status update about upcoming satellite missions currently in development. Alan Johnston, KU2Y, AMSAT Vice President Education Relations, spoke about opportunities for using the AMSAT CubeSat simulator in educational settings. Drew Glassbrenner, KO4MA, Vice President Operations, briefed those attending on the status of current satellites. Frank Karnauskas, N1UW, Vice President of AMSAT Development, reported on the AMSAT Youth Initiative and its features. AMSAT President Robert Baxton, KE4AL, announced this week at the Hamvention that the 2024 AMSAT Symposium will be held October 25th through the 27th, 2024, at the Doubletree by Hilton Tampa Rocky Point Waterfront in Tampa, Florida. Attendance was steady at all AMSAT exhibits throughout the Hamvention weekend, and satellite operators enjoyed meeting face-to-face the voices and call signs encountered on the satellites.
The Federal Communications Commission voted on April 25, 2024, to restore a national standard to ensure the Internet is fast, open, and fair, as it voted to reestablish net neutrality rules. Today's decision to reclassify broadband service as a Title II telecommunications service allows the FCC to protect consumers, defend national security, and advance public safety. Through its current actions, the Commission creates a national standard by which it can ensure that broadband internet service is treated as an essential service. This vote also makes clear that the Commission will exercise its authority over broadband in a narrowly tailored fashion without rate regulation, tariffing, or unbundling to foster continued innovation and investment. With this action, the Commission restores fundamental authority to provide effective oversight over broadband service providers, giving the Commission essential tools to protect the open Internet. Internet service providers will again be prohibited from blocking, throttling, or engaging in paid prioritization of lawful content, restoring the rules that were upheld by the D.C. Circuit in 2016. Safeguard national security. The Commission will have the ability to revoke the authorizations of foreign-owned entities who pose a threat to national security to operate broadband networks in the U.S. The Commission has previously exercised this authority under Section 214 of the Communications Act to revoke the operating authorities of 4 Chinese state-owned carriers to provide voice service in the U.S. Any provider without Section 214 authorization for voice services must now also cease any fixed or mobile broadband service operations in the U.S. Monitor Internet service outages. When workers cannot telework, students cannot study, or businesses cannot market their products because their Internet service is out, the FCC can now play an active role. For further information on net neutrality, including the history of the proceedings starting in 2004, when then chairman of the agency challenged the broadband industry to preserve Internet freedoms, followed by more than a decade of work to secure these protections, visit fcc.gov/net-neutrality.
The FCC is establishing a new spectrum steering team to lead the Commission's work to implement spectrum policies. FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel announced the team on May 14th. This team will coordinate the FCC's work to implement the National Spectrum Strategy that the White House released in November. The team will collaborate with the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, federal agencies, and stakeholders. Susan Mort, Deputy Chief of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, and Ira Keltz, Deputy Chief of the Office of Engineering and Technology, will co-lead the team. Krista Witanowski, Legal Advisor in OET, will serve as Chief of Staff. The Spectrum Steering Team brings together policy experts, economists, and engineers from across the Commission. Demand for spectrum is growing at a breakneck pace as wireless technology expands and transforms so much in our economy and modern life, so we need to get creative with spectrum policies, Chairwoman Rosenworcel said in a release. The National Spectrum Strategy is a good start, and the Spectrum Steering Team will put its experience, talent, and leadership to work helping to shape a bright wireless future. The National Spectrum Strategy identified 2,786 megahertz of spectrum across 5 spectrum bands for in-depth study to determine suitability for potential new uses. It also identified a pipeline of spectrum to study for private sector use, including the lower 3 gigahertz and the 7 to 8 gigahertz bands. The strategy also improves coordination on spectrum decision-making both within the government and between the private sector and the public sector, and focuses on advanced technology for spectrum sharing capabilities.
AMSAT is now soliciting nominations for the 2024 AMSAT Board of Directors election, to be held in the third quarter of the year. The seats of the following 3 incumbent directors expire in 2024 and will be filled by this year's election: Mark Hammond, N8MH, Bruce Page, KK5DO, Paul Stetzer, N8HM. Further, up to 2 alternate directors may be elected for 1-year terms. A valid nomination for director must be written and requires either 1 member society or 5 current individual members in good standing to nominate an AMSAT member. Written nominations with the nominee's name, call sign, and contact information, as well as the nominator's names, call signs, and contact information, should be sent to the AMSAT Secretary, Jeff Davis, KE9V, P.O. Box 11, Yorktown, Indiana 47396. AMSAT bylaws require that the nomination be written and in the form specified by the Secretary, who has elected to accept written nomination materials via postal mail or in electronic form, including email or electronic image of a paper document. Fax transmissions cannot be accepted. Email nominations may be sent to jdavis@amsat.org. No matter what means are used, petitions must be received by the Secretary no later than June 15th. The Secretary will verify the qualifications of candidates and nominating members or member societies as petitions are received and will notify candidates whether their nominations are in order by the end of June.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
In the United States, the Eastern Pacific hurricane season officially begins on Wednesday, May 15th, and the Atlantic hurricane season begins June 1. The National Weather Service designated May 5th through the 11th as Hurricane Preparedness Week in the U.S., reminding vulnerable areas of the country that tropical cyclones are among the nature's most powerful and destructive phenomenon. Just one storm can permanently change a community. During the week, daily public information statements, along with educational and preparedness info, were posted on websites as well as social media. Bobby Graves, KB5HAV, net manager for the Hurricane WatchNet, said that they use Zoom for meetings and greet times where all members, new and veteran, were able to get to know each other. The group also discussed various challenges that they might face during activations. One of the more recent concerns they talked about was solar storms and communications blackouts. The number of hurricanes predicted this year is far above the average.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. So here's a summary of the Dayton Hamvention, which was held last weekend. Over 30,000 people attended the Dayton Hamvention in the ARRL National Convention, which was held May 17th to the 19th at the Greene County Fairgrounds and Expo Center in Xenia, Ohio. The highlights for DXers included the DX dinner on Friday evening, the DX Forum on Saturday afternoon, and a presentation about the DX Marathon program on Sunday morning. Additionally, Flex Radio announced their new Flex 8000 generation of software-defined radios, and ICOM teased a new 60th anniversary concept radio that is expected to debut at the JARL Ham Fair August 24th and 25th in Tokyo. And from what I've seen of the display, it might be worth going to Japan to see what that's all about. VE3, LYC, Cesar, and W3UR Bernie were inducted into the CQDX Hall of Fame at the DX dinner on Friday night. The dinner was hosted by the Southwest Ohio DX Association, SWDEXA, and the International DX Association, or INDEXA, presented the awards. The Saturday evening contest dinner was hosted by the North Coast Contesters with ICOM and DX Engineering as platinum sponsors. PP5JR, Sergio, and N2IC, Stephen, were named to the CQ Contest Hall of Fame. DL8HCZ, Joaquin, and K3LR, Tim Duffy, were announced as the newest members of the CQ Amateur Radio Hall of Fame. The late K2MGA, Richard Ross, the longtime president of CQ Communications, who passed away on April 27th, was inducted posthumously into all three CQ Halls of Fame. SWDEXA announced that W8S, the Swains Island DXpedition, was the 2023 DXpedition of the Year, and that Thierry, F6CUK, was the 2023 DXpeditioner of the Year for his single-handed operation of the FT8WW DXpedition on Crozet Island. It was an absolutely fantastic evening and well worth attending the DX dinner next year if you get the chance. Also at the DX dinner, there was an announcement about the new WSJT-X Super Fox mode. and this will be debuted during the N5J DXpedition later this summer. The WSJTX development team announced at the Dayton Hamvention, and as I said, at the DX dinner actually, it was only 6 years ago in 2018 that the Baker Island DXpedition changed the face of digital QSOs when it debuted the Foxhound submode of WSJTX. Joe Taylor, K1JT, and his dedicated team of software developers and testers have provided hundreds of thousands of DXpedition QSOs in the succeeding years. In many cases, this mode has enabled DXers with limited power and antennas to add new ones to their DXCC awards that would not have been otherwise possible. Also, their open source programming code led to integration into JTDX, MSHV, as well as continuous improvements to WSJTX. Never resting on what was good enough yesterday, Joe Taylor's team will soon offer a Super Fox mode of WSJTX for making rapid FT8 QSOs. Hounds chasing the Super Fox DX station will transmit normal FT8 signals, as in the already familiar Foxhound mode. But rather than sending concurrent streams of up to 5 FT8 signals, the Super Fox station will transmit a single constant envelope using a 1.5 kHz wide waveform that conveys signal reports or RR73 acknowledgments to as many as 9 different hounds simultaneously. Most importantly, there will be no signal strength penalty for simultaneously transmitting to all those hounds. Another very significant improvement will be a digital signature contained in the Super Fox message that will allow the receiving software to verify the legitimate origin of the signal from a validated DXpedition. So we're hoping that will eliminate the pirates. The Super Fox development team will be beta testing the software in coming weeks with the goal to have it rolled out in time to debut during the N5J Jarvis Island DXpedition later this year. So here's what's happening in the world of DX. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. So we have some information on Mount Athos, which is currently SV2 RSG-A. Monk Ivakis says it really was him on 14007.8 at 1923 Zulu last Sunday and not a pirate. He was CQing and working Europe and heard at least one on the North American East Coast. He says he will continue to get on the air a little bit for a few more days before he continues a mission abroad, and he does have some spare time before leaving on that. And a rumor I recently heard is that he will try to make some sort of an impact in the CQWPX contest this coming weekend. In the interest of bringing more young amateur radio operators into DXpeditioning, the Pacific Islands DXpedition Group and the Youth on the Air Americas are pleased to announce a partnership involving the upcoming 3 Delta 2 Zulu DXpedition to Rotuma in November. Youth on the Air is a program for and by young amateur radio operators with the express goal of building skills and fostering lasting friendships and mentors with young operators. Rotuma DXpedition organizer Greg, W6IZT, will be taking 2 of his next-gen ribs as a complement to the 6-member DXpedition on-island team. Greg says, quote, following the success with the remote radios used at the recent CB0ZA Juan Fernandez DXpedition, we will have 2 remote stations available to young amateur radio operators through YOTA on Rotuma. It is our hope that 75% of the remote contacts made from 3 Delta 2 Zulu will be made by the youth participants. 19-year-old YOTA member Keys, W0AAE, will coordinate the scheduling and operation by the remote YOTA operating team. A freshman aerospace engineering major at Iowa State University, Keys was the 2023 Bill Pasternak, WA6 ITF Memorial Amateur Radio Newsline Young Ham of the Year Award recipient. He coordinated participation in the Americas for December YOTA month and is active with the remote operation for young hams through RHR. YOTA Camp Director Neil Rapp, WB9 VPG, said that he welcomes this partnership with the youth members of the YOTA organization and the PIDXG DXpedition in Rotuma. I think this is a great opportunity for our young operators to experience a DXpedition and enjoy operating in pile-up conditions. The 3 Delta 2 DXpedition is scheduled for November 15th to December 4th. In addition to the young operators who will be involved with the remote side of the operation, one of the on-island team members is 23-year-old Jamie, M0SDV, who was one of the members of the recent 8 Radio 7 X-ray de-expedition of Guyana. Additional members of the 3D2 Zulu team include veteran de-expeditioner Hal, W8HC, Nathan, K4NHW, and Mike, W0VTT. Greg says that they are awaiting word on the 6 members of the team, another young amateur operator who will be named soon. That's really pretty exciting, and anything we can do to get youth involved in, especially DXing, we need to do. Well, here's the one I really have my eyes on because I need this one. Western Malaysia, 9 Mike 2. The Kuala Lumpur DX team will have 9 Mike 4 IOTA on the air from Kapas Island, IOTA Asian 073, May 31 to June 2nd, sideband CW and digital, 80 through 10 meters. So I'm really looking forward to working West Malaysia and getting that as an all-time new one. So until next week, this is Bill, AJB saying 7-3, and I hope to see you in the pileups.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Over the years, you've heard me utter the phrase, get on air and make some noise. It's not an idle thought. The intent behind it is to start, to do something, anything, and find yourself a place within the hobby of amateur radio and the community surrounding it. Since starting my weekly contribution to this community 13 years ago, almost to the day, I promise this wasn't planned, you'll see why in a moment, I've been working my way through the things that take my fancy, things that are of interest to me, and hopefully you. From time to time, I don't know where the next words are going to come from. Today, they came to me 5 minutes ago, when a good friend, Colin, Victor Kilo 6 Echo Tango Echo, asked me what inspires me, after I revealed to him that I didn't know what I was going to talk about. That's all it took to get me rolling. There are times when getting to that point takes weeks. I do research, figure out how something works, explore how it might have been tackled before, if at all, and only then I might start putting my thoughts together. Often I'll have multiple stabs at it, and, if I'm lucky, sometimes something emerges that I'm astonished by. Today is much simpler than all that, since the only research required is to remember the people I've interacted with. Last week I met an amateur, Jess, Mike 7 Whiskey Oscar Mike, who was in town. Until last week we'd never met and interacted only online. We discovered that we have a great many things in common, a joy for curiosity, exploration, technology, computers, and a shared belief that we can figure out how to make things work. That interaction, over the course of a day, continues to fuel my imagination and provides encouragement to try new things. The same is true for a friend, Eric, Victor Kilo 6 Bravo Juliet Whiskey, who asked what they should do with the hobby after having been away for a long time, with family, children, commitments and work. Just asking a few simple questions got the juices going and provided inspiration to start playing again. Another amateur was bored and claimed to have run out of things to do. A few of us started asking questions about their exposure to the hobby. Had they tried a digital mode? Had they built an antenna? Had they tried to activate a park? Or, as I have said in the past, any of the other 1,000 hobbies that are embedded within the umbrella that we call amateur radio. Right now I'm in the midst of working through. Actually, truth be told, I'm starting. I've yet to start. Reading the online book published at pistr.org. Prompted by a discussion with Jess last week, I started exploring a known gap in my knowledge. I likened it to having a lamppost in front of my face. I can see to either side, but in between is this post, obscuring an essential piece of knowledge, how one side is connected to the other. In my case, on one side I can see the antenna, how it connects to an ADC or an analog-to-digital converter. On the other, I can also see how you have a series of bytes coming into your program that you can compare against what you're looking for. but the two are not quite connected, obscured by that post. I know there's a Fourier transform in there, but I don't yet grok how it's connected. Recently I discussed using an RDS or Radio Data Systems decoder called RedC, connected to RTL-FM, in turn connected to an RTL SDR dongle. That is, you connect an antenna to a cheap digital TV decoder tuned to an FM broadcast station and use some software to decode a digital signal. It turns out that the Pi SDR book serendipitously uses this signal path as an end-to-end tutorial, complete with all the code and example files to make this happen. I actually read the chapter, but it's assuming some knowledge that I don't yet have. So I'm going to start on page 1. Again. So what has this got to do with inspiration, you ask? Well, everything and nothing. Inspiration doesn't occur in a vacuum. It needs input. You cannot see light without it hitting something. Radio waves don't exist and cannot be detected until it hits an antenna. The same is true for inspiration. It needs to hit something. You need to react. It needs to connect. That is why I keep telling you to get on air and make some noise. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima Alpha Bravo.
After 25 years lost in the vastness of space, a missing satellite has finally been located, highlighting the challenges of tracking the multitude of objects orbiting Earth. The rediscovery sheds light on the difficulty of monitoring the approximately 27,000 objects that populate Earth's orbit, a number that continues to grow with each rocket launch and satellite deployment. The satellite in question, the infrared calibration balloon, was part of the United States Air Force's Space Test Program and was launched in 1974. Its purpose was to serve as a calibration target for remote sensing equipment, but a deployment failure left it adrift as space debris. Despite initial attempts to track its whereabouts, it vanished from ground-based sensors in the 1990s, only to resurface last month. Jonathan McDowell, an astrophysicist from the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, discovered the satellite's reappearance while reviewing archival data. He explained that the satellite's low radar cross-section and possible malfunction equipment made it difficult to detect. This underscores the challenges faced by ground-based radar and optical sensors tasked with monitoring objects in orbit. Tracking objects in space is akin to air traffic control, with sensors relying on identifying the orbit of moving objects and matching them with designated satellite orbits. However, this becomes increasingly complex as Earth's orbit becomes more congested, particularly in geostationary orbit, where monitoring is hindered by a lack of radars positioned precisely on the equator. The Department of Defense's Space Surveillance Network currently tracks over 27,000 objects, predominantly defunct satellites and debris. As the number of satellites and rocket launches continues to rise, maintaining accurate tracking becomes crucial to mitigate the risk of collisions and space debris hazards. While the rediscovery of the missing satellite serves as a reminder of the challenges of space tracking, it also underscores the importance of continued efforts to monitor and manage Earth's orbital environment. With technology evolving and space activity increasing, effective space surveillance remains paramount to ensure the safety and sustainability of activities in Earth's orbit.
It is time for this week's AMSAT satellite shorts from all over. First up this week is news that Japan's Moon Sniper, also known as SLIM, has astounded experts by surviving its third lunar night, despite not being designed for such harsh conditions. Initially landing near the Scioli crater back on January 19, the spacecraft encountered an anomaly during descent, landing on its nose and facing west, hindering its solar panel's ability to generate power. However, Moon Sniper continues to defy expectations by waking up after each lunar night, transmitting new images, before going back into hibernation. Despite enduring both the extreme cold of the lunar night and the searing temperatures of the lunar day, the spacecraft has maintained functionality, prompting close monitoring from the mission team to identify potential deteriorating components. As Moon Sniper enters hibernation again, the team plans to resume operations in May, expressing gratitude for ongoing support and even composing a song titled 15-Degree Slope to commemorate the mission's unexpected journey. Next up, since April 28, 2019, the Swiss satellite net on QO100 has been a consistent weekly event, marking its 5th anniversary on the same date in 2024. Hosted by HB9RYZ initially and later by HB9TSI from Italy, the round convenes every Sunday at 9 p.m. on 10,489.740 MHz, typically with 5 to 10 participants, though 15 joined for the anniversary round. Led by Paul, HB9DFQ, the round maintains a familiar format. Participants check in, share station updates and radio experiences, delve into topics, and bid farewell. Despite no specific celebration planned, the anniversary drew a hearty attendance. Notable moments include Roman, HB9HCF's reports from Antarctica during the pandemic, while regular attendees like IS0/HB9SJP and supportive listeners add to the camaraderie. The inaugural round was preserved on SoundCloud by HB9WDF, encapsulating the enduring spirit of this community gathering. And our final satellite short this time out shows that our sun continues to edge into the most active phase of its 11-year cycle, multiple massive X-class solar flares. The largest, an X5.8 flare, erupted from associated active sunspots, along with coronal mass ejections directed towards Earth. This sustained activity caused a G5 solar storm last weekend, leading to aurora visible from middle latitudes as far south as Puerto Rico in the U.S. and all over Europe. This was one of the most powerful solar storms since an estimated X28-45 flare in 2003 contributed to the 2003 Halloween solar storms that damaged or interrupted services from multiple spacecraft, saturated measurement instruments, and made ISS astronauts shelter in the more shielded Russian segment.
Are you ready for another excursion into amateur radio history? This is Bill Continelli, W2XOY, and I'll be back in a moment with another installment of the Ancient Amateur Archives.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Repeaters. It seems they are everywhere, and they are. Several thousand amateur radio repeaters operate on our bands from 29.5 megahertz all the way through the microwave range. In fact, there are more amateur repeaters in the U.S. and Canada than there are AM broadcast stations. How and when did this evolve? Let's take a look at the development of repeaters in the amateur radio community. If you had a guess when the first repeater came on the air, what would you say? 1970? 1965? 1955? Try 1932. It was in the early 1930s that the first duplex phone relay stations, as they were then called, came into existence. W1AWW and W1HMO set up a manned relay station in a 90-foot wooden lookout tower near Springfield, Massachusetts. They used a super regenerative receiver tuned to 60 megacycles, the top of the old 5-meter band, and a modulated oscillator transmitter on 56 megacycles, the bottom of the band. Stations in Connecticut, Massachusetts, or Rhode Island could transmit on 60 megacycles and have their signals manually rebroadcast on 56 megacycles. This relay station, of course, was in operation only when amateurs were on duty at the lookout tower. Fully automatic repeater operation was still over 30 years away. In the 1950s and early 1960s, there were a few AM repeaters on the air in California, but, for the most part, VHF operations in the 1940s through the late 1960s were on AM phone in the simplex mode, with a handful of sideband stations thrown in. Using crystal-controlled transmitters with about 10 watts and single-conversion superhet receivers, the typical VHF operator had a range of 10 to 15 miles, not counting any band openings. There were a handful of FM stations, of course, but the development of FM as a mainstream amateur mode of communication had been pushed aside by sideband. As early as 1940, QST had construction projects for a complete 112 megacycle FM station, but FM took a back seat in 1947 when sideband appeared. Now, however, thanks to an FCC edict, it was about to make a comeback. In 1960, the FCC issued new requirements for the users of VHF commercial frequencies. Over the period from 1960 to 1970, commercial users gradually phased in narrowband 5 kilocycle deviation equipment to replace the wideband 15 kilocycle transceivers they had been using. Rather than revamp the older equipment to meet the new requirements, they simply purchased new radios. The old units made their way to the surplus market, where they were quickly snapped up by amateurs. Converting this equipment to amateur use was relatively easy, and soon hundreds of stations were operating on 52.525 and 146.94. Why those frequencies? Well, 52.525 was the lowest 6-meter frequency on which wideband FM was allowed, and 146.94 was chosen to accommodate technicians who weren't allowed above 147 megacycles. Thus, these became the first calling channels. It wasn't long before some surplus commercial equipment was revamped into repeaters. Unlike the 1932 setup, these were fully automatic devices with no need for a control operator to be present. This, however, presented problems. Part 97 at that time contained no provision for repeater operation, and it was unclear as to whether it was legal to operate a repeater without a control operator present. Many proposals were presented to the FCC to clarify the rules in regards to repeaters. FM and repeaters received considerable publicity in 1969 when Hurricane Camille caused widespread destruction in the Gulf Coast and in Virginia. This was the first time mobile rigs, FM, and repeaters were used extensively in an emergency. FM activity increased in late 1969 and early 1970 with the ARRL's announcement that it no longer considered technicians to be just experimenters, but rather full-fledged communicators, as well as the introduction of the first commercial rigs for the amateur market from manufacturers such as Galaxy, Clegg, and Drake. By 1970, it was clear that coordinated legal growth of FM and repeaters was necessary. In early 1970, the FCC proposed its first repeater rules. They were as follows. On 6 meters, repeater inputs would be from 52.5 to 52.7, with the outputs at 53.0 to 53.2 megahertz. For 2 meters, repeater inputs would be authorized from 146.3 to 146.6, and the corresponding outputs would be from 146.9 to 147.2. On our 220 band, the input-output subbands were 223.1 to 223.3 and 224.1 to 224.3, while on 440, repeaters would be authorized on 447.7 to 448.9 for inputs and 449.1 to 449.3 for outputs. Whistle-on or other coded access would be required. Carrier-activated repeaters would not be allowed. No crossband, linked or chain repeaters, or multiple outputs would be allowed. The maximum power allowed would be 600 watts input or about 400 watts output. And, finally, the FCC declined to allow fully automatic repeater operation. The proposed rules required the licensee of a repeater station to be in attendance at the transmitter or at an authorized fixed control point and to monitor all transmissions of the station. The proposed repeater rules appeared unduly restrictive to many hams. Except for 2 meters, each band had only a 200 kilohertz wide input-output window. On 2 meters, the input-output subbands were 300 kilohertz wide, but 2/3 of the repeater output subband was above 147 MHz, where technicians weren't allowed. The FCC had still not acted on the ARRL's 1969 proposal to open all VHF frequencies to technicians. When the FCC was questioned on the legality of a technician using a repeater whose input was within the 145 to 147 MHz subband, but whose output was above 147, they said the technician operator could not use the repeater, and the FCC went on to say, quote, "The licensee of such a repeater should sit there with the latest call book showing license class and his finger on the no-no button." Unquote. So much for liberal repeater rules. Despite the FCC's rather restricted proposed rules, repeater operations flourished throughout 1970 and 1971. Over 200 repeaters were on the air by 1971, almost all of them in the 146 to 147 MHz range, so they could be used by technicians. But with the uncertain status of future FCC rules, the lack of national frequency standards, and the inability of technicians to operate the full 2-meter band, a dark cloud hung over the FM world. In our next installment, we will review the ARRL's national plan for 2-meter FM, as well as the long-awaited FCC rules on repeater operation. I hope you will join me. This is Bill Continelli, W2XOY, for This Week in Amateur Radio.
Serving the amateur radio community for a quarter century, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, heard around the world on the amateur bands and streaming on the Internet.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. AMSAT has announced the dates for the 2024 annual symposium. It will take place at the Doubletree by Hilton, Tampa Rocky Point waterfront from October 25th through the 27th. The Board of Directors meeting will be on October 24th and the morning of the 25th. Mark your calendars, and we look forward to seeing you. This is another great opportunity for you to meet the AMSAT Board of Directors, some of the engineers, and see great presentations. If you have not been to an AMSAT symposium and you are in the area, you should make it a point to attend. Registration information will be forthcoming. This does not happen very often. In fact, it has not happened at all until now. Max, who is operated as SA5IKN, M0SKN, US6IKN, and EI6KC, has earned his third satellite worked all zones. He already was the first to earn WAZ from 2 different zones. Congratulations. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for the Solar Forecast Report, brought to us each week by Tad Cook, K7RA, in Seattle, Washington. 6 new sunspot groups emerged over this reporting week, May 16th through the 22nd, 2024. 13 were in last week's report. Last week's report was issued late because of IT issues at League headquarters. Solar activity was down over this week, with average daily sunspot numbers declining from 175 to 155.1, and solar flux declined from 220.5 to 198.9. The average daily planetary A index dropped from a very high number of 71.1 to 13.9, and the middle latitude A index dropped from 47.9 to 11.7. Predicted solar flux for the near term will be 194, 192, 190, 188 and 186 on May 26 through the 30th. 225 on May 31st through June 2nd, 220 on June 3rd and 4th, 210 on June 5th though the 7th. The near-term predicted planetary A index will be 12 on May 26th, 8 on May 27th, 5 on May 28th through the 30th. 10 on May 31st, 12 on June 1st and 2nd, 8 on June 3rd, and 5 on June 4th through the 7th.
In radio sport this week, May 25th through the 26th, it's the CQ WWPPX contest. That's CW, of course. May 27th, the QRP ARCI Hoot Owl Sprint, CW. May 30th, the RSGB 80-meter Club Championship, that's CW. And on May 31st through June 2nd, the Podexus 070 Club 3-day weekend contest, that is digital. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions on May 31st through June 2nd. It's CPAC hosting the ARRL Northwestern Division Convention. That's in Seaside, Oregon. June 1st, the Atlanta Hamfest hosting the ARRL Georgia Section Convention in Marietta, Georgia. On June 9th, the Breeze Shooters Hamfest hosting the ARRL Western Pennsylvania Section. That is in Butler, Pennsylvania. And on June 15th, it's the ARRL Main State Convention and Hamfest. That's in Augusta, Maine. And remember, you can search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find events in your area.
A law that takes effect on July 1st in California will require the makers of consumer electronics to offer purchasers of those products, along with service dealers and repair facilities, a means to repair them by providing guides, parts, and tools for a period between 3 to 7 years after the manufacturing date, depending on the item's original wholesale price. The new right to repair law brings California in line with a growing push of other states for similar legislation. According to the website of the Reinhardt legal firm, 30 other states have introduced similar legislation. 2 other states, New York and Minnesota, have similar consumer electronics laws in effect. A right to repair law in Colorado covers agricultural equipment. The new California law will apply to all electronics sold there as far back as July 2021. The law excludes video game consoles and alarm systems, neither of which is considered an electronic or appliance product. According to the website of the Sidley Austin Law Group, similar measures are in the works in Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Massachusetts, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Texas, Vermont, and Washington. The bill was introduced last year by State Senator Susan Talamantes Eggman as a means of reducing electronic waste and improving California residents' opportunities to repair or have repaired broken products.
The Northeast Ham Exposition and ARRL New England Division Convention announced a major addition to its program for 2024. The event runs from August 22nd through the 25th in Marlborough, Massachusetts, and will feature the Mini Contest University, Mini CTU, based on Contest University. Contest University has been featured at Dayton Hamvention since 2007 and presented in 15 countries to over 10,000 participants. A series of contest-oriented talks and presentations will be offered at Ham Exposition on Friday, August 23rd. More information is available at hamexposition.org. 24 amateur radio groups will be activating different parks in and around Puerto Rico on May 26, 2024. The event is the Great Mega POTA Parks on the Air, which includes 4 ARRL-affiliated clubs. This effort's being coordinated by ARRL Puerto Rico-affiliated club coordinator Juan Lopez, KP4KJ, who saw the potential for this special activation as the POTA program is growing on the island with new activations every month. Lopez also has approached different radio clubs to determine their needs and common interest in POTA activities. More information on the activations can be found on the web at POTA.app, #/activations. Beginning June 1st, 2024, several amateur radio clubs will activate special event stations for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. The Amateur Radio Club of the National Electronics Museum, K3NEM, located in Hunt Valley, Maryland, will be on the air as W2D from June 1st to the 4th, 1300 Zulu to 2200 Zulu. Call sign W2D's primary operation will be from June 1st to the 6th, with the possibility of additional operations during June 7th through the 14th as operator availability permits. Operations will take place on 80 meters, 3.544 and 3.844 megahertz, as well as additional bands and digital modes. And the Southeast Metro Amateur Club in Cottage Grove, Maryland, will operate with call sign W2W on June 6th from 1500 to 2000 Zulu on 7.0400 and 14.040 megahertz, and the single sideband portion of the 40 and 20 meters band. A commemorative QSL card will be available for those who send a self-addressed envelope to N0BM. See cmark.org for more information. And during June 8th and 9th from 0630 Zulu to 2200 Zulu, the Torbay Amateur Radio Society in England will operate on 7.040 and 14.040 megahertz and the SSB portion of 40 and 20 meters. More information and special event station call signs will be listed before the event at www.torbayars.org.
A researcher in Iceland is calling satellites a hazard to the protective shield around the Earth known as the magnetosphere. The scientist Sierra Solter Hunt, a doctoral candidate at the University of Iceland, writes that magnetic dust generated at the time of satellite re-entry could eventually destroy the planet's protective shield, a concern accelerated in recent years by the proliferation of commercial satellite megaconstellations such as the Starlink network. An article on the Space.com website notes that although meteors are also known to burn up as they enter our atmosphere, their makeup is not the same as the man-made satellites. Several media reports say that the research paper's theory has been questioned by other scientists who nevertheless agree that the impact of satellites burning up upon re-entry does require further study.
The International Amateur Radio Union, or IARU, has re-elected Timothy Elam, VE6SH/G4HUA as president, and elected Thomas Reed, DFTOO, as vice president. Both will serve 5-year terms that began May 9, 2024. Elam begins his 4th term as president. Reed has been active in IARU matters for several years and has managed the Deutsche Amateur Radio Club International Affairs team since 2009. The International Amateur Radio Union is the worldwide federation of national amateur radio organizations. The membership of the IARU consists of more than 160 member societies in as many countries and separate territories. ARRL is the International Amateur Radio Union International Secretariat.
You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio on finer repeater systems nationwide.
Organizers of a special event marking this year's World Cup cricket tournament are inviting hams to get on the air while the games are going on. You don't have to know how to play cricket to be part of this tournament. The World Cup cricket tournament special event station needs operators who live in the countries and states where competition will take place starting June 2. The station will be on the air until June 29. Amateurs from the U.S. and the Caribbean are being invited to get involved by getting on the air. The teams will play at stadiums in 3 U.S. venues and 6 in the Caribbean for a total of 55 matches. One of the stadiums is a new one in New York, where amateurs in that region, members of the Great South Bay Amateur Radio Club, are organizing the special event using the call sign W2C. Hams will operate on all the HF bands using all modes. To become an activator, contact Lou, N02C, at loumaggio@hotmail.com.
Organizers of this year's USA Radio Orienteering Championships have announced that they have been approved for a permit to hold the 2-meter classic at the Eddy Discovery Center at the Waterloo Recreation Area in Michigan. The race will be among several challenges taking place at a variety of venues during the week-long event, which includes practice sessions and training camps, as well as cultural and dinner outings. The championships are being held between October 5th and 13th. The USA Championships are being held in combination with the International Amateur Radio Union Region 2 Biennial Amateur Radio Direction Finding Championships. The USA event's competition age categories range from 10 and younger to older radio operators 80 and above. The championships are being organized by the Southern Michigan Orienteering Club and a number of ham radio clubs throughout the southeastern part of the state. For additional details, see their website at radioorienteeringchamps, all one word, .us.
Young amateurs will be operating radios in the Pacific remotely this November, joining the 3D2Z Rotuma DXpedition as remote operators. The Pacific Islands DXpedition Group has partnered with Youth on the Air Americas to give young activators a taste of the challenge. Coordination and scheduling of the remote operation by the Youth on the Air team will be done by Keys Case, W0AAE, a freshman aerospace engineering major at Iowa State University and the 2023 recipient of the WA6 ITF Memorial Amateur Radio Young Ham of the Year Award. He is an active member of Remote Ham Radio. Youth on the Air Camp Director Neil Rapp, WB9VPG, said, "The partnership presented a great opportunity for the young operators to be on the receiving end of a DXpedition pileup. Rotuma remote stations will be available for the Youth on the Air team using 2 radios in a box provided by DXpedition organizer Greg, W6IZT. Greg said he hoped that at least 3/4 of the DXpedition's remote contacts will be made by the Youth on the Air operators. The 6-member DXpedition team itself will be operating from the island. The DXpedition is scheduled for November 15th through to December 4th.
The recipients of this year's Amateur Radio Software Award have been announced. The 5th Annual Amateur Radio Software Award has been awarded to the hams behind 2 innovative open-source software projects, OpenWebRX and OpenWebRX+. The projects and their developers are being honored with the International Award for providing innovative, free, and open software that enhances amateur radio. The leader of the OpenWebRX project is Jacob Ketterl, DD5JFK. OpenWebRX can be operated from any web browser on a computer with network access and has no need for additional client software. The SDR receiver was designed with a simple interface to make it easy for inexperienced people to experience HF reception. The leader of the OpenWebRX Plus project is Merit Feyzullin, KC1TXE. OpenWebRX Plus is a Linux software that contains various decoders to be used with OpenWebRX, providing access to SSTV, AIS, CW, and RTTY. It is considered a fork of the OpenWebRX project, which means it uses the source code of the original project to expand upon it.
The name and call sign of Leo McHugh, EI8BR, was well known among CW operators in Ireland and was a frequent entry in the logs of CW operators around the world. Leo, who died last month, shared his love of the code with anyone who asked. He is credited as the organizer and promoter of CW training sessions offered at the South Dublin Radio Club, where he had been a member for many years. Daniel Cusson, EI9FHB, said that Leo was a hard but fair taskmaster in CW training, and his patience was often sorely tested by his students. His favorite expression of "do it right, lads," was often repeated in these classes. Over the years, his instruction helped many club members get their Class A license for CW. The Irish Radio Transmitter Society awarded him the prestigious Collins Cup in 2020 for his training program. A civil engineer and a self-taught trumpet player, Leo had a CW fist that many envied for its speed and skill, even for a radio operator in his 90s. Leo was also a contributor to the Irish Radio Transmitter Society news publication, Echo Ireland, and would often read the weekly IRTS broadcast news.
A well-respected and much-loved YL, active in contesting and DXing, and an advocate for international friendship, has become a silent key in the Philippines. Tritza Cruz Aniceto, DW3TRZ, was an award-winning contester, a mentor to many and a special friend to YLs, with whom she shared her talents in needlework, taking time to craft ham radio-related gifts and crust-stitched QSLs for hams around the world. Teresa maintained an active YouTube channel called Mabuhay, DX Stitch Amateur Radio, which she established to promote worldwide friendship through ham radio. Teresa died on May 18th of pancreatic cancer, according to the Philippine Amateur Radio Association and her friend Ann Dirkman, KC9YL, who supported Teresa in joining the U.S.-based Young Ladies Radio League as a DX member. In the Philippines, mabuhay is a wish for a good life. Teresa Cruz Aniceto, who said that word often to friends, surely had one herself. She was 49.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
And finally this week, as the old adage goes, always be yourself. Unless you can be a pirate. Then, always be a pirate. That certainly applies to the small but special circle of swashbuckling radio enthusiasts in the United Kingdom who have kept the rogue seaborne radio station, Radio Caroline, afloat now for the past 60 years. Over that time span, it's been a fascinating tale of trials and tribulations just to keep the renegade broadcaster on the air and running for as long as it has. The story begins in 1964, when a maverick Irish businessman by the name of Ronan O'Rahilly decided to break the BBC monopoly and set up a station on a ship in international waters off the English coast. As broadcaster and author Ray Clark points out, the radio landscape was very, very different then. Back in the 60s, kids in America had a wealth of radio stations to listen to, Clark said. Here in the UK, we had one, the BBC, and they hadn't discovered the Beatles. We needed Radio Caroline, from a ship 3 miles off the coast, to hear the pop music that we craved for. In the UK and other countries, though, the government held a monopoly on broadcasting, and they were not always enthralled with the music kids liked. Where there is demand, there is an opportunity, and several enterprising broadcasters set up radio stations at sea, the so-called pirate radio stations. However, over the decades, there have been a host of changes and challenges to the renegade radio station. In 1967, the British government passed legislation, the Marine Offences Act, to stop ship-based pirates from broadcasting, with Radio Caroline being just one of a handful of stations broadcasting from sea. Every single station complied by shutting down their operations, all except for Radio Caroline, which kept pumping out pop music to millions in the UK and on the European continent. A year later, financial problems would hit, and Radio Caroline was raided and towed to the Netherlands by Dutch creditors, where it was docked for the next 4 years. The Caroline vessel, the MV Mi Amigo, eventually returned to the airwaves until it sank in the North Sea in 1980, with all of the crew members safely rescued. But after an absence of 3 years, undaunted, Radio Caroline returned once more on a new ship, the sturdy former super trawler, the MV Ross Revenge, a bigger and more modern ship for the station to operate on. But in 1991, disaster struck again. The MV Ross Revenge ended up losing its anchor chain and managed to drift onto the notorious Goodwin Sands in the English Channel, where the crew was rescued but the ship was badly battered. It was subsequently towed back to the UK, sadly limping into Dover Harbor on England's south coast. What followed was years of painstaking work by volunteers who helped patch the ship up and get it into proper working order again. Now, after all the challenges the station has faced, Radio Caroline still exists 60 years on, even if it operates slightly differently than it once did. The station now broadcasts from a legal land-based studio, but for one weekend a month, crews go out to the vessel, now anchored in the English territorial waters of the Blackwater Estuary off Essex, and do their programs from there. The station remains as popular as ever as it broadcasts pure nostalgic fun harkening back to the swinging 60s. Listeners love it not only in the UK, but now people around the world can listen to it via internet streams. For DJs like Kevin Turner, who's back on the vessel after a 5-year gap, it's a massive journey down memory lane. 60 years is good long innings, but it's also an opportunity to remind people that the station is still on the air, we're one of the few broadcasters still using AM, and we've managed to broaden the appeal of the radio station quite a lot over the last few years, Turner said. Setting up each month's special broadcast from the ship is the job of Dave Foster. When you come out, there's always something that you need to give a technical tweak to make it all work properly, because it's left for a month or so, and then you come back on, and it's a bit cold, a bit damp, and there's always something that has to be fixed to make it work properly again, said Turner. These days, the station is a registered charity, and the latest project, according to DJ Andrew Austin, is to raise money to get it into dry dock for well-needed maintenance work. We are really the caretakers of it for our part of the time while we're all here, so it's so important that the ship gets sorted out in the months and years to come and remains visible, Turner said. For those tempted for a deeper dive into the subject, Ray Clark has penned the definitive version of the history of the station, called The True Story of the Boat That Rocked. You couldn't write a novel that would be like this. When you tell people that it is factual, you say, no, that surely didn't happen, Clark said. Battles with governments, battles with the weather, and battles within the organization. The whole story is unbelievable, and still, 60 years on, Caroline still exists. It defies all the odds. It should have been beaten a week after it started in 1964. Yet here we are, in 2024, still going strong. For now, though, once a month, which seems to come and go with the blink of an eye, the special weekend broadcasts speed by, and soon it's time to leave the sea spray behind and hop on a small fishing boat tender. But 30 minutes later, it's land-ho once again, as the misty dream evaporates and is replaced by a jolting return to the real humdrum world of 9 to 5. For upcoming schedules and links, head to radiocaroline.co.uk.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeater systems all around the U.S. and around the world on great operations like WA0RCR from the center of the U.S., Wentzville, Missouri, where This Week in Amateur Radio is proud to be part of the legendary Gateway 160-meter net report each weekend. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you would like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and all our news team around the world, this is Will Rogers, K5WLR in Fayetteville, Arkansas, wishing you 73.